gentlemen. Welcome back to episode 2 of the Roe Jogan podcast. In today's episode, you'll be joined by your hosts, Odam and Hyunam.
Thanks for the introduction. Glad to be back to discuss some basic presuppositions and bring light to what is more basic to answer what is less basic.
Wow, Hyunam, I love the enthusiasm. In today's episode, we'll be answering 3 new unit questions that cover various topics, but mostly under the topic of eternality.
The first unit question is, how can you prove something must be eternal, and what are the common ways to show that being can come from non-being?
To understand this unit question, we must break down our key terms, such as eternal. For something to be eternal, it has to fit into 4 main categories: independent, self-maintaining, self-existing, and self-explaining.
Independent means not contingent. It doesn't depend on outside forces or external conditions for its existence. For example, God is considered independent in theism due to his existence not being contingent on anything else apart from himself.
Self-maintaining implies that things doesn't need anything else to keep its existence without constant intervention. For example, a machine that requires refueling is the opposite of self-maintaining, as it requires continuous human intervention to continue its course.
Self-existing means not having a beginning or end in a traditional sense. It simply exists because it is a necessary object to exist. If things cease to exist or require assistance to exist, it isn't self-existing. In my opinion, this is the hardest concept to grasp.
Finally, self-explaining means to contain a reason for its existence within itself. It doesn't require an outside force to explain its existence. For example, humans aren't self-explaining, as outside forces can explain the root of humans, such as conception.
To the question of why something must be eternal, we've provided the SMBE argument that supports the existence of something eternal. 1. Contradictory statements cannot both be true and cannot both be false. 2. The contradiction of some is eternal is none is eternal. 3. None is eternal. Therefore, all is temporal, all had a beginning, all came into being. 4. If all came into being, then being came into existence from non-being. 5. Being from non-being is not possible. Therefore, the original none is eternal is not possible. Therefore, its contradiction some is eternal must be true.
This SMBE argument uses the law of non-contradiction, which holds that a statement and its direct negation cannot be both true or false at the same time. In this case, the premise of none is eternal is being tested.
However, the point of being coming into existence from non-being completely dismisses the idea of none is eternal being true.
Why is that, Mr. Go?
Because it's a common understanding that something cannot magically derive from nothing. There must be a root cause. Some examples of people trying to push the notation that being came from non-being can be found throughout history, especially when trying to understand the beginning of the universe, which is the Big Bang.
Stephen Hawking and James Hartle in the 1980s proposed the idea of no boundary conditions for the universe. To summarize, both individuals argued that the universe doesn't need or have a singular beginning point, but rather time and space emerged from an indistinguishable, boundaryless state, suggesting that the universe could have spontaneously arisen from practically nothing without prior causes.
Because none is eternal relies on the idea that everything has a beginning, being unable to define the beginning of its existence completely dismisses the premise as valid.
Therefore, its negation, some is eternal, must be true.
Bingo! However, the degree of eternality must be addressed, whether that means something is eternal or all things are eternal, such as material monism, spiritual monism, etc. This will be addressed a bit later in the episode.
Moving on swiftly to our second unit question, how can we be reasonably sure matter is not all there is and is not eternal?
To understand and dissect this question, we must first understand the idea of matter being all there is and is eternal. This is the core concept of material monism. Material monists claim that all is one substance, monism, and that this substance is matter, hence suggesting that the material world is eternal.
The word material monism can be described as many other words, such as naturalism, materialism, or physicalism.
To argue against material monism, Gangrene gives us 4 counter-arguments. However, for the sake of time, we'll be breaking down the 4th and final argument. Naturalism is not based on science. The broad topic can be broken down into very smaller topics.
To break down the less basic question, we must first understand the more basic ones. What is science, and why do people find it credible? Science is a commitment to finding natural explanations for what is observed around us. It is credible as it claims to be publicly verifiable through repeatable experiments, employs methodological naturalism, and rules out supernatural explanations in principle. In hindsight, who wouldn't believe in science if all those claims about its credibility were true?
Yeah, but it's pretty stupid not to.
However, when you break down proven scientific discoveries, you'll begin to realize that the non-uniformity within materialism. For example, the idea of evolution from hominids to humans. Hominids are families of primates that that materialists believe humans evolve from, whether that be through macroevolution or microevolution. The difference is a slight change over millions of years or a drastic change in a shorter period of time.
Let's say I'm a skeptic and you're trying to convince me against the idea of hominids to humans for a better understanding.
Alright, so what are your thoughts on hominids to humans, Mr. Skeptic?
If humans evolved from hominids through the process of evolution, surely there isn't space for a divine hand to guide the development of evolution. If we're products of random mutations and natural selection, where does God fit into this?
I don't think evolution disproves God. I believe evolution proves the existence of God. To put this into perspective, if evolution is depicted from an artistic point of view, then the process itself would be similar to a painter's brush. And the result of the brush creation, however, there must be a larger designer. If you assume that the universe existed without purpose and intelligent design, it begs the question.
But specifically detailing the evolution from hominids to humans, isn't it quite easy to examine the similarities in anatomical features such as bone structure, brain shape, and genetic overlap?
I don't disagree with you, but I want you to think about this. The human mind demonstrates a far greater ability compared to the second smartest animal. Animals act on instinct that the Creator provided them with, but humans can solve complex problems, ask existential questions, and invent incredible things that animals couldn't imagine.
But that's just neural activity in our brains. Our consciousness' magnitude of thinking is just a byproduct of evolution, somehow.
Our level of consciousness and thinking transcends beyond biological explanation. Every day we are finding out far complexities within our brain that proves to us that we exist in a non-material world. Hominids to humans don't describe why evolution happens, but how. That is a problem in your skepticism.
I see. A simpler counter-argument to the idea that the material world is eternal is the problem of safe self-maintenance. For example, the sun is observed to be part of the material world. However, it isn't self-maintaining. The sun will eventually burn out and won't suddenly go back to its original powerful state. The sun can be described as a lasting figure over thousands and hundreds of years, but it still cannot be seen as eternal due to its inability to maintain itself over the test of time.
Moving on to the next and final question, how can we be reasonably sure that the mind and soul is not there is and is not eternal? This idea can be defined as spiritual monism, which is the belief that everything is spirit. The spirit is eternal and is all connected. But here's where reincarnation comes in. If the soul continues to exist after death and gets recycled into a new life, does that mean it's eternal? Reincarnation is a phenomenal existence in which the soul continues to exist and become another life form while the old one dies. This points to the idea that the soul is eternal. However, reincarnation requires the leap of faith. It is unprovable, such as the existence of the soul or an afterlife. However, faith is not always against reason. It's reason's highest expression when certainty is not possible.
This points to many other perspectives such as idealism, the possibility that reality might be a projection. This points to the brain in the vat scenario. What if our perceptions are manipulated similarly to a simulation? Or SAS percipi. To be is to be perceived. If our minds and others' minds aren't in total control, maybe some external force organizes it all. Like Kant's idea of causality, which says cause and effect let us make sense of what we observe, even if ultimate reality, the nominal, is unknowable.
Furthermore, Shankara's idea that we're all illusions. This is easily disprovable because if we were all illusions, how can we interact and perceive one another? In illusions, there are systems connecting us, such as our spirit. Narjuana's middle way helps us avoid extreme conclusions and focusing on pragmatic understanding. Instead of obsessing over is it real or not, Narjuana says, does it function? Can we make meaning out of it? For example, when crossing a bridge, instead of asking if the bridge is real, Narjuana tells us to question whether it will get us from point A to point B.
Therefore, these unanswered questions and disproven points allow us to steer away from spiritual monism. However, what is true? This is where theism comes into play. To understand, I've created a syllogism to better understand. Premise 1. If spiritual monism is true, there is no distinction between the creator and creation. Premise 2. If the universe demonstrates complexity, order, and many more, which implies a distinction. This is premise 3. Spiritual monism is inaccurate, and a theistic framework is more reasonable. Thanks for tuning into the Roe Jogan podcast.